Interesting. I guess I've got to understand what this concept or this idea of sleep debt is, because I want to make sure I'm super clear on what it is and isn't. Because when you say the word debt, I assume it's kind of like I owe the sleep bank manager a couple of hours.
Yes.
I've kind of gone back and forward on this idea of sleep debt. I think some people have told me that it's real. Some people have told me that it's not real. And I don't know where I should stand on it.
Yes.
If I haven't, so for example, I flew into LA, the first couple of nights my sleep wasn't great. But I had good sleep last night. Am I still paying for it now?
The way I explain the concept of sleep debt is that your body requires a certain amount every single night. Again, we talked about individual variability, but let's just say you need 8 hours every night. And conceptually, if you don't meet that 8 hours, then you build up a debt. So if you're only getting 6 hours a night, you now have 2 hours of debt built up. If you go Monday to Friday, that's 5 days. Now you have 10 hours built up, right? 2 hours every night becomes 10 hours. And if you then sleep in on a Saturday and you get, let's just say, 10 hours of sleep, you've paid back 2 of those hours, but you still have 8 hours left to go.
And my body knows.
Yes. So conceptually, that's the idea of accumulating sleep debt. I do stand in the camp that believes that that does accumulate over time. We do think that you can pay back some of that debt on the short term, right? So what you lost, like you said, this past day or this past week, maybe this past month, you should pay that back with getting extra sleep, or we call sleep extension. We don't think that you can surplus and bank more and that you can pull from that in the future. But we recognize that if you've got insufficient sleep, that if you extend it over a couple of days, maybe a couple of weeks, then you will see benefits in your reaction time, in your fatigue levels, in your performance outcomes. And so we do recommend that as a tool, especially if you know that you're going to have a day where you're going to have sleep loss. So it's a strategy, for example, if you know, okay, in a week, I'm going to have a project and I'm not going to be getting enough sleep that night. Then what you can do in the days leading up to it is getting sufficient sleep, but arguably even more, so that we know when it gets to that project, the decrements that you'll experience tend to be less robust than if you went into it with just, say, that was 5 hours.
So what evidence do you have that sleep debt is a real thing? What's the first thing that comes to mind?
So what I've dedicated my career to is trying to understand how to pay back sleep debt with sleep extension interventions. So what that means is typically I'm working with a number of collegiate athletes where many of them are not getting what they need, because when we start these studies, many of them have high fatigue levels. They are reacting slowly. We often see lapses in their judgment and their ability to ultimately perform and function, which is what they consider their baseline. But then when we actually challenge them by paying back some of that debt, by getting additional hours, when we monitor the differences that can make over multiple weeks, that's where we see there's improvement in the reaction time. Their fatigue levels drop. Their performance on the field improves. And so we recognize what has changed in this is trying to pay back some of that accumulated debt when the rest of their training has been held consistent, where we've been trying to maintain the rest of their training.
Which is key, which is the key point, because in my mind I go, well, maybe if you've got the athlete to sleep well on that first night, then when they've showed up to training, they've trained a little bit harder, they've built their muscles a little bit more, they've had better recovery in their muscles. So then the next day the same thing happens because they've slept. So it's actually just that they're training better, which is causing them to improve their scores.
That's fair. We've tried to hold their training to be consistent and choosing periods where their training isn't going to vary significantly, as well as you can almost make the argument too that sometimes as the season goes on, athletes get more fatigued, more tired, and that can be actually a decrement to how they'll perform. So when we see the benefits come down the road as the season potentially gets even longer, that at least is some suggestion that the intervention of sleep, while we also have the measures of how much more they were getting, actually were at least associated with these performance outcomes.
Because one of the key things about REM sleep, which is the sort of final stage of sleep, is that it helps with muscle recovery.
Deep sleep is actually deep sleep is where it's implied that there's more muscle recovery regeneration because there's the biggest pulse of growth hormone during your deep sleep. So to back up a bit, you have light stages of sleep, then you have deep stages of sleep, And then you have that rapid eye movement sleep, or when you dream. That tends to be more associated with consolidation of learning and memory and skill consolidation. So you go through these cycles during the nighttime, about 90 to 120 minutes, but the proportion changes through the night. The beginning of the night, you get more of that deep sleep. And then in the early morning hours is when you get more of that REM sleep. So you might have woken up in an earlier morning and had the recall of these vivid dreams. It's because you often will be waking up from that REM sleep.
Yes, that happened last night, actually, because I woke up suspiciously early for me. So I woke up at about 5 or 6 o'clock, and I was just kind of dipping in and out of dreams. And they were very vivid dreams that I can still remember now.
Yeah.
So the muscle memory element of all of this, what is muscle memory, and how is that sort of implicated with sleep?
So muscle memory, there's different types of memory, and you need sleep. Think of sleep as hitting that save button, right? You need to sleep after you have learned new information, learned a new skill, so that you can consolidate those memories and be able to retrieve it later. So I always use an analogy of hitting that save button. After you learn new material or learn a new skill set, you need to go home and sleep so that it goes into long-term storage and that you can retrieve that the following day and subsequently. Without that sleep, we know that that groundwork for that new skill or that new memory is not going to be as strong. And so in the context of students who are trying to study for a test, or an athlete that's trying to remember the playbook, you want to space those intervals that you're learning that material and have sleep that follows so that you strengthen those connections.
And also, you mentioned when you were talking about one of your athletes, encouraging them to nap before a game.
Yes.
I read this fascinating word in the research that I was doing on your work. I think it was nappuccino.
Yes.
What's a nappuccino?
The nappuccino. So this is a useful tool if you're trying to have a temporary boost in alertness and performance. So the nappuccino, you go and take your favorite caffeinated beverage.
Yeah.
The caffeine will start to kick in about 15 minutes. And you go and then take your 20 to 30 minute power nap. So if you're able to fall asleep within that 5 to 10 minutes while the caffeine will start to come on board, then when you wake up after 20 to 30 minutes, then bam, both the caffeine will have kicked in and the power nap will have kicked in. And there's research to show that that's more effective for alertness and performance improvement for a couple of hours than if you only did the caffeine alone or only did the power nap alone. So the nappuccino is a useful tool for some who utilize caffeine, and you can partner that together with a short 20 to 30 minute nap.
So if I wanted to take a nap now, I have an espresso and then go and have my nap.
Exactly. Yes. The caveat is you do need to fall asleep within about 10 minutes or else the caffeine will start to come on board. But if you do this in the late morning or early afternoon, it can be a helpful tool so that you have a boost in your alertness for a couple of hours.
And I grew up thinking that naps didn't work, because the minute I learned about sleep and these sleep cycles, and that it takes, 45, 60 minutes, whatever it is, to get into late stage sleep, like the REM sleep, the deep sleep, I thought, what's the point taking a 15, 20 minute nap if I'm not going to get into deep or REM sleep?
So there's benefit of just that 15-minute nap you mentioned. You want to stay in lighter stages of sleep because there's benefits of lighter stages of sleep. And that can give you that alertness and performance boost even when you're in lighter stages of sleep. You actually don't want to go into deeper stages of sleep because when you take the longer naps, as I think you might have shared, you've taken the 2-hour nap, the 3-hour power nap, you wake up and you're much more sluggish, much more groggy. That's not a good state for you to go out and then do, work after that, or it's not the state that you want to be if you're a basketball player and have to go and play a game. But those deeper stages, you come out of what we call sleep inertia with that sluggishness. And so it can also affect your sleep at night and make it harder to sleep subsequently. So you actually want to stay in those lighter stages of sleep and keep those naps very short.
So what's the maximum length that a nap should be?
I like 30 minutes.
Okay.
Yes. So you can time that by setting an alarm. If it takes you 5 or 10 minutes to fall asleep, you can plan for that as well. And then setting an alarm to wake yourself up 30 minutes later. I think it's a great strategy when, again, you don't get sufficient sleep at night or you had poor sleep leading into that night and you need a little bit of a boost later in the day.
What do you think of the snooze button?
The snooze button.
Are you a fan?
I'm not a huge fan of the snooze. I fully understand why people love to hit the snooze and then go back to bed. And if you're someone who does that, one of my suggestions is just to cut down so that you only hit the snooze once, 5 minutes later, start your day. The reason why is because it helps to maximize your REM or your dreaming sleep in those early morning hours if you can actually sleep consolidated all the way until the time you have to wake up. So for example, if you're someone who hits the snooze button 5 times every 5 minutes for a half hour, it means that you're having very interrupted sleep for the last half hour of your night. Versus if you just let yourself sleep consolidated all the way through and then maybe hit the snooze button just one time and then got yourself up to start your day, it means you would have given yourself another 25 minutes of consolidated sleep, likely that dreaming REM sleep that's so important for learning and memory. And so that is one just easy adjustment that you can make in terms of your morning approach to maximizing what you get during the night.
So what's the value in consolidating it versus just
Having fragmented sleep?
Yeah.
So then if you're getting a lot of that REM sleep in those early morning hours and you're snoozing, you're going to be waking up and coming out of that REM sleep. So you likely are changing the stages of sleep you would be getting in those early hours. So you would then be awake and then probably going into lighter stages of sleep, awake, lighter stages of sleep than necessarily having a solid REM period all the way until you wake up.
What's the cost of that?
So learning and memory and consolidation is definitely one area that we recognize as associated with that REM sleep. And so you want, as we talked about, it changes through the night. You want to have as much as possible, but you have to have just the duration. So when you get the most of it in the morning hours, if you cut that short and either wake up earlier or you're snoozing and you're interrupting it, you're not going to maximize the value you get of the hours in REM.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that those 25 minutes, I give them to REM sleep versus just giving them to little fragmented light sleep.
Exactly.
So I'm better off just putting my alarm to the time that I actually have to get out of bed.
Exactly.
Just to maximize the amount of REM sleep that I get to consolidate my memories.
Are you a snoozer?
No, not really.
Okay.
Well, I mean, we all have our moments, but not really. I can't remember the last time I pressed the snooze button. But the thing that I do, and I'm not sure if this is a good idea or not, is because I have told myself, and I say told myself because I'm quite conscious of the BS that I believe about myself, but I've told myself that I'm like an owl chronotype or something, which, by the way, I don't even know if it's true. And I don't know if chronotypes are true. And I typically work quite late. And I love working late. I get better ideas late. I do my writing pretty late at night as well. And so what I've done in my life is I've basically made sure that I don't have any meetings or any engagements before 11 o'clock. So even like this podcast today started at 11 o'clock.
Yes.
Basically nothing in my life starts till 11 o'clock for that very reason, because if I do end up staying up a little bit late, I want to be able to kind of sleep through without having to set an alarm and just wake up naturally. What do you think of that? Is that suboptimal?
No, I think it's a great strategy. So there are chronotypes where you've mentioned you're more of an evening owl. You go to bed later. You like to wake up later as a natural predilection.
Is that real? Or
This
have I just
is
told
real.
myself
This is real.
Justifying myself?
No, there is a natural tendency for some to feel like they're evening owls. And there's others who feel like they do much better in the morning. So they go to bed earlier, they wake up earlier, they're more productive in the morning. Those are our morning larks. And then there is a group that's somewhere in the middle that don't strongly lean one way or another. But really what you're doing is you're making your sleep work to your chronotype and to your advantage, where you do feel like you're more productive in the evenings, and then you want to be able to maximize your sleep, waking up without an alarm and starting your day later. I think that's like a great strategy because a lot of people aren't able to have that flexibility, and so society often will force, particularly the night owls, onto an earlier schedule where you have to wake up, whether to go to work or other obligations or kids,
and then we
at
fail
an
in
earlier
school.
point. And then you're cutting your sleep short, like you mentioned, like with school, and then we're getting these, and then you're on a schedule that doesn't work synergistically with what your chronotype is.
They should do some studies on kids in school and like disobedience and ability to pay attention and do your homework and grades, because honestly, I was so useless in school, and I really think a lot of it. Now, I'm not entirely sure here because I got diagnosed with ADHD when I was like 30 years old. So part of me thinks I've just got like a very active brain. And part of having an active brain meant that late at night I was finding ways to stimulate it by playing video games, etc. So that might just be the reason. But the other reason might be that I'm an owl chronotype and I found it really hard to get up at like 7:30 to go to school by sort of 8:30ish. And so I would miss school. I would show up knackered. I would sleep in lessons. And I feel like school just starts way too early for kids.
It's an ongoing problem, and actually, in a very interesting way, there has been a change to school start times, particularly in California. This year was the first year that school start times for high schools and for middle schools was shifted much later, because there are studies to show that when our students are better rested, they have higher attendance rates. Their GPA and grades are much higher. There's less mental health issues. There's less car accidents. And so these studies have been over the last decade and longer, in which they have built evidence to help make decisions to start school time later. And that is, in California, been enacted this year, and some other states are starting to follow suit. But to your point, what makes it challenging is that at the age of high school, many of those body clocks are shifted. And so students want to, in adolescence, go to bed later and wake up later, naturally. That's just how our sleep changes through the life cycle. But when they stay up late and then we cut their sleep short by forcing them to get up really early for school, now they have insufficient sleep, and that builds like a sleep debt. And so they're not setting themselves up for success in school for learning and memory. So that's where, again, there's more evidence of, if we can shift the school start time, get these students to have a little bit more sleep, they ultimately are better prepared for school, come to school, have less car accidents, and are just healthier students.
Do you think there's anything parents need to know about sleep as it relates to their children and sleep hygiene with their children?
I think it's important for parents to start at the early years of instilling good sleep habits, a good sleep routine, and giving their children the tools and skills to be able to make sure that it's a priority as they go through early childhood into adolescence, and hopefully then sets themselves up for making sure it's a priority for their adult life. I'm a young parent myself. I just had my first son, and so I recognize and can empathize with the struggles of getting sufficient sleep when they're very young, but then trying to instill how they can approach their sleep from early age, I think would be incredibly helpful to also just change culturally how we think about sleep, because so many of us now have never learned about sleep before or what we should do until you're an adult. But if we can make that change earlier on, I think we're going to have healthier kids, better families who are better rested, and also just this generation where we recognize this is so important that we shouldn't sacrifice it, because we're doing ourselves a disservice to letting us be the best that we can possibly be.
How old is your son?
11 months.
11 months. So how are you sleeping?
Oh, I transparently am quite tired.
Okay. Yeah.
I as a new young mom also, I don't have the ideal sleep that I know I would love. And it's just for a short time, but I'm trying to be strategic of the things that I can do with some of the tools that we've talked about, trying to leverage power naps. When, for example, I do have to still wake up during the nighttime to tend to him. And the early morning starts are not always consistent. So my sleep schedule is not always consistent. So, going back to those 3 buckets we talked about earlier, like if I don't get the full duration that I want, then how do I maximize the quality, right? I've optimized my sleep environment. I try to have a process to wind down at nighttime, or the timing, is, and the sleep schedule is another area that you can still work on when, for example, you may not be getting the duration. So these are strategies that I try to employ when I know that I also am a work in progress and trying to get the best sleep possible.
If you love the Diary of a CEO brand and you watch this channel, please do me a huge favor. Become part of the 15% of the viewers on this channel that have hit the subscribe button. It helps us tremendously, and the bigger the channel gets, the bigger the guests.